My dad was a young and energetic father. He poured his undivided attention and energy into his family every single day. Who was Sam? From my perspective, he was the first real feminist I ever knew. He told me back in the 70s that a woman can go to school and get a degree from the university so she can be smart and independent. So that's what I did. He taught me how to enjoy and play sports, like football, baseball, tennis. And one day when I was 17, he asked me if I wanted to go and learn how to fly a plane at Mandel Airport. He signed me up and away I flew. I was the only girl in the entire class at the time. Of course, he liked to be very sneaky, and he made me promise I wouldn't tell him. Who was Sam? He was a great dad to my brothers. He supported them in all their endeavors, played basketball and tennis with them every week back in the 80s. He got them interested in the Judean benevolent and in society when they were older. He was extremely proud. He was very proud of his sons. Who was Sam? He was a loving and extremely loyal and devoted brother. He was one of 5 brothers. He never had a bad thing to say about any of his brothers. He accepted each one for the person that they were. He was especially close to Mandel, whom we sadly lost so many years ago. My dad spoke of him often and how much he missed his true best friend. It was my dad who opened his heart and his home to my uncle when my uncle was going through hard times. And because of that, we grew closer to my Uncle Max and to all of our Mandel cousins. Who was Sam? He was a fun uncle to my cousins, Cohans. My cousins all have stories about their Uncle Sam and the fun and mischief they had together. Who was Sam? A beaming grandfather and later a great-grandfather. Wow, 7 grandchildren whom he watched grow into amazing men and women. Oh, the fun times they had growing up with their young children. Who was Sam? He was an amazing husband to my mother, Dorothy. They were high school sweethearts. He taught her how to drive stick shift when she was just 16. He wrote love letters to her when he was a counselor at Camp Tamarack in 1951 when he was 19. I'm in possession of those letters, and I read a couple of them to my dad a few weeks ago. He said that my mom was the only girl he had ever loved, and that he would never leave her side for as long as he lived. And he married her in 1955 when he was 23 years old. He was the example of what a husband should be. Who was Sam? He had the heart and soul of a Jew. He was proud of his heritage and he instilled in his children a strong Jewish identity and belonging. Who was Sam? He was a gentle man, a funny and youthful man. He was a humble man, a man who had lived a long time, who enjoyed his health, both physical and mental, for most of his life. Finally, Sam was a happy man, especially when he was with his family. I am forever thankful and extremely lucky that he was my father. Rest in peace, Dad. I love you.
Hi, I'm Sam's second middle child, his middle child, Drew. I want to tell you a little bit about my father. His story is not a rags to riches story. His story is not a Holocaust survivor story, but he did live through the war as a child in Canada. He did face anti-Semitism as a child and a young adult and got into some fistfights over it. He lived his life as a man that I would always look up to and as a model for me of what a man could be and should be. And believe me, there were many times I was in awe of him. Physically, he was tough as nails. For a 5'6" guy, he qualified to play on his high school basketball team and earned the nickname Sparky. He could hold his own under the hoop with any of them. When I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, he put out an electrical fire in our basement with his bare hands, which were blistered up for weeks afterwards. Mentally, he was methodical and a perfectionist, in a way that I could only dream of. As a child and a young adult, I would watch him work on a do-it-yourself home project, or fix his car, which he loved doing, especially with his brother, our Uncle Max, or help me with a school project. I would get impatient with his incredible attention to detail, but the result in the end was always amazing. He was able to earn his degree in accounting, studying at home, while also coping with 2 little children and a baby in the house. This was something he was especially proud of. He was almost always in control of his emotions, and he was level-headed. I only saw him tear up once in his life. This was about 10 years ago when we watched a video together about how Israel had grown from a desert land into a strong Jewish nation. He loved Israel. He was humble, a perfect example of the quiet generation. He never bragged about anything. He was incredibly proud of his 3 children, who all went through university and earned degrees, but he never let on how proud he was to anyone but his kids. When I asked him why he didn't brag when others around him did, he said, "I don't have to. Your accomplishments speak louder on their own than I ever could." He was fiercely independent. He often spoke about wanting to build a moat around the house and guarding his house as his sanctuary. He abhorred being in debt and worked hard to pay off his mortgage and was so very proud to have paid everything off. He was defiantly loyal to those that he loved. He was the middle child of 5 brothers. He spoke endlessly about his brothers and how he missed them all after they had all passed away before him, especially my Uncle Max, who was 1 year older than him and who he looked up to and was closest to over the years. He let his children know how much he loved us all the time. And to his wife, I have never seen a man more loyal. Over the last year, as his health was failing, he had 2 things he told me that continued to keep him alive. One was to make it to his 93rd birthday, which was 2 weeks ago, making him the oldest living Mandel family member that he knew of. He was so pleased to have made it. Second was that he did not want to leave our mom, that he took it as his duty to care for her until the very end. They had been married for 70 years as of last June. I think, though, near the end, he made peace with this, seeing how my sister Sherry, my brother Darren, and I cared for him. He knew he could leave her in good hands. Through my entire life, he was the man I most wanted to be like. I miss him and will always love him. He loved and was dearly loved by myself and my wife Alana, by my sister Sherry and her husband of blessed memory Michael, by my brother Darren and Jane, by all of his grandchildren, Loren and her husband Sneer, Erin and her husband Alec, Evan and Ashley, Brandon, Jake, Rachel, and Maya, and his great-grandchildren Gidon and Yoni. My father spent many years as the president of the Judean Benevolent and Friendly Burial Society, looking after and guiding the Jewish burials of so many people who did not belong to a shul. He asked me once a few years ago, what did he do to deserve living longer than anyone else in the family? I gave him an answer that I thought of from both accounting and Torah. I said, "Dad, you know the accounting principle of double dipping, getting 2 tax breaks for a single transaction? Well, there's a Torah principle that allows for this too. These are the things that you can do that simultaneously earn you both a long and rich life in this world, and your soul will also be elevated in the afterlife." In our morning service, we read every day a small Talmud that says, "These are the precepts whose fruits a person enjoys in this world and the world to come. They are honor due to a father and mother, acts of kindness, early attendance at a house of study morning and evening, hospitality to guests, visiting the sick, providing for a bride, escorting the dead, and absorption in prayer, and the study of Torah is equivalent to them all. Dad, you did pretty well on a lot of these, but you scored 100% looking after others after they passed on. You earned a long life. I love you, Dad."
I'm Darren. I'm the baby with the family. dad was my teacher, and the best teacher I ever had. My first memory of my dad was sitting in the basement with my siblings, and he was teaching them the multiplication tables. I wasn't even in school yet, but by the time I hit kindergarten, I was doing math at a grade 4 level. He really didn't teach me, though, from an instructive perspective. He was more teaching me through doing, and I emulated his characters. For example, he taught me sports, and you've heard my father was quite the athlete. And I just watched him, and I copied him. And eventually I was able to play with him, and eventually I was able to play against him. He was a fierce competitor. He never let me win. He was passionate, he was committed. He fostered my confidence. He taught me how to be persistent and keep trying. When I lost, he taught me humility and success. He taught me perseverance and defeat. And he never stopped teaching me. I got involved with the Judean Benevolent Society just to spend more time with my dad. And I was invited into a world of other like-minded men, dads, who embraced me as their brother. I watched my dad lose all 4 of his own brothers. I watched the men of the Judean lose many people, suffer many losses over years. And I learned that death was not to be feared. It was inevitable. It was an essential part of life. It was Hashem bringing people nearer. My dad taught me to contribute to the well-being of our communities. Growing up, I saw him involved in many things: ratepayers associations, the United Way, Children's Aid Societies, running the neighborhood tennis club, and of course running the Judean, which he did until he was 87 years old. My dad was a good teacher. He raised us 3 kids who love him, who respect him, and who have gone on to build on his legacy. He'll forever be in our hearts and minds. We love you, Dad.
When I think of Zeta, it feels that he's always been there, and always exactly the same. I'm still not sure if he owned one tracksuit that he wore every single day, or if he just had many that all looked identical. But either way, that consistency was comforting. By simply being himself, Zeta taught us what it means to be reliable, level-headed, patient, and curious. He loved learning, and he loved a good debate, even more.
Zeta had a very specific way of deciding when you became an adult. It wasn't about age. It was about whether you could have an intellectual discussion, preferably with sources. Whenever you asked him a question, he would say, "Let's look it up," and we'd pull out an encyclopedia from the 1970s. The first time he told me that he felt like we could have a real adult conversation was when I learned enough about ancient Egypt and the Bible that we could debate the historical accuracy of the 10 Commandments movie. I was in grade 4. I felt so proud every time he told me I made a good point. I hope I made him proud by sharing his love of classic movies. I was always excited to tell him about something I watched on Turner Classic Movies, and he would be just as excited to tell me everything about it, what year it came out, who directed it, who starred in it, and somehow even who was an extra.
Zeta could fix anything. My dad will say that he isn't as good, but Zeta taught him well. And now my dad can fix everything too. Zeta had a tool for every project you could imagine and knew things about cars that most mechanics don't. He is also the only person we know who had a few $100s worth of Canadian Tire money, and that might be one of his greatest accomplishments. And Zeta valued anything that took dedication and hard work to do, and showed it even in small everyday ways. No matter what he was writing, he took the time and care to do it in the most beautiful calligraphy. And he showed us some of his practice exercises, so we could try to work on it too.
I'm proud to follow in Zeta's footsteps by working in government. We would talk about how neighborhoods in the city have changed, how he had been to almost every municipality in Ontario, and how you can't make vacation time like you used to. Not that he ever took any until he retired. Those conversations meant so much to me.
Zeta loved his great-grandsons deeply. and they would be so proud, he would be so proud to see them today, following in his footsteps in their little basketball programs. And when we FaceTimed him on his 93rd birthday, the boys were in awe. They kept saying, he's 93, he's been alive for almost 100 years. And Zeta loved every second of that.
Our grandparents have always been role models for Alec and me, for how to face anything together, for how to build a life that lasts. 70 years of marriage is something to truly admire. We're so lucky to have shared so many milestones with them well into our adulthood.
Towards the end of his life, and whenever things got hard, Zeta held on to what mattered most. He made sure we knew how much he loved us and how much he loved our bubby. He always remembered the best day of his life as the day they got married. Zeta was steady, thoughtful, curious, and deeply loving.
We will miss him more than we can say, but we carry his lessons, his humor, and his love with us always.
Donations in Zeta Sam's honor will be to Zaka, an organization in Israel that helps prepare bodies for burial during emergencies, reflecting his commitment to making sure that everyone in our community received meaningful and dignified Jewish burials.
Every time I saw Zadie without fail, he'd lean in and say, "Let me ask you something. Any boys?" And I'd run back and go, "No, Zadie, no boys." And he'd smile and say, "Okay, good, keep it that way." It became our little ritual, and it always made me laugh. Zadie taught me how to play poker, how to solve Sudokus and crosswords. He sacrifices puzzles to teach me, sitting there patiently, believing I'd figure it out, and then making me feel exceptional when I did. When we were little, he would boast about how we could solve puzzles faster than most adults, and while I'm not sure that was actually true, I let myself bask in this happiness. I had so much pride in enjoying the same things as him. When we'd come over, someone would ask what we'd want to watch, but Zadie always knew. He'd say, "No, I know what they want," and he'd hand us the comic section of the paper he had saved all week for us. Whenever Bubby would be determined to make sure I finished every bite of a heaping plate, Zadie would always step in. He'd quietly steal pieces off my plate, and after I gave him my "I just can't finish this" look. This small act says everything about who he was: observant, kind, and always looking out for others. It was so hard seeing him unable to eat over the past few weeks, knowing I couldn't return the favor, knowing it wouldn't fix anything if I just stole the Jell-O off his tray. I wanted to help him the same way he always helped me. In the last few weeks, I had the privilege of visiting him often, and he continued to amaze me. Even then, he knew every actor in every old movie that was playing, and what other movies they had been in, and who they had married, and who their children were. He knew it all. His body was so weak, but his mind was still so sharp and so present. That part never left him. He shared stories of his childhood and of his siblings, of his long drives across Ontario for work. He told us how he married Bubby, how she more or less picked a date, and strongly suggested that attendance was not optional. His friends made sure he showed up, he said. And he said it tenderly and lovingly. He was happy he chose that life. He shared how his days became even fuller than he could imagine after retirement, and how some of his very best days came after 60. But between silly jokes and lighthearted comments, he would pass on deep words of wisdom. He knew exactly what he was saying always. He kept things fun and gentle, but he always made sure to emphasize what truly mattered: time, family, and love. Even in those moments, Zadie was still teaching, still guiding, and still being Zadie. I'll miss the littlest things the most. The memory that keeps playing in my mind is the way he would cut his fruit, always slicing a peach, one slice for him, one slice for me, taking turns. I remember remember even in those moments I felt special every time he handed me a slice. It was so easy and so natural for him to include his family as part of his routine, effortlessly showing us, "You are wanted here." Internally, I felt eager for my next turn, but I kept my cool, quietly emulating his calmness beside me. It was never rushed and never complicated, just him making sure we were in it together. That's how he showed his love in the simplest, most thoughtful ways. I'll miss you and love you forever, Sadie. I wanted to say something funny because my Zadie was funny. Maybe something irreverent because he was that too. He was very irreverent about death. I can't remember a time when he wasn't joking about when he was gonna die. He loved dinner time death fun talk, but if you cut through the humor, you could see how dedicated he was to helping others. Anyone who read the monthly Judea Benevolent and Friendly Society newsletters could see that. From Sam Mandel being listed as the Noble Master, the Secretary, the Treasurer concurrently. But my favorite newsletters to read were the ones where he had successfully roped in his kids, so that interspersed between the various Sam Mandel roles, there were also Drews and Darrens scattered in as well. For my whole childhood, until the day they disbanded tragically before I was 18, I insisted that I would become not just the first woman member of the Judean, but also the first woman Noble Master, because that's what Zadie did, and I admired him. And there was so much to admire. He was very loving. He was a lifelong learner, the definition of it. Anytime he had a question, he had his hand halfway to his collection of dictionaries and thesauruses and encyclopedias before he could even finish asking. And I loved coming to him with questions, because no matter what it was treated with the utmost care and importance. And in turn, I loved getting to teach him how to use an e-reader, which he picked up on faster than people half his age. He kept up with all the new releases from the library, with his customary diligence, which kept Bobby very well stocked in John Grisham. I loved how cheap Zadie was, how he bought these 5-cent razors back in the 50s, a lifetime supply, and hasn't bought another one in 70-some years. I loved visiting and counting down how many packs he had left. When he was down to his last 40-odd razors last year, he joked that he had to die soon because he refused to buy another one at the price they were at now. I had the same ritual with Maya about boys with Zadie. But one day he deviated from the standard script. He said, "Do you have any boys to report?" And I said, "No boys, Zadie." And he said, "Rachel, I know you're in engineering. It's okay if you love someone Chinese, you can tell me." And I said, no one Chinese, Zadie. But I was really touched that he wanted me to make sure that I knew that. But I was even more touched the next week when I said, "No boys, Zadie." And I guess he'd been ruminating on it because he said, "Rachel, it's okay if it's a woman, you can tell me." And I love that all he wanted for his grandkids was for them to be happy in whatever way made sense to them. And he was a very big part of that happiness and of who I am today, and of who many of us are today. And I'm so grateful that I have the privilege to love him and to be loved by him.
Well, my Zadie meant a lot to me, and he was always there in my life. one of my first words, as I was told, were both bird and then Zadie. Unfortunately, he's passed, but everyone here today, look how many people have shown up for a man who was 93 years old, and so many people still remember him, and he will still be remembered into the next century. All his memories. And one thing I will say that definitely I will remember many years from now is one kid. My Zadie loved to poke the bear. He loved to see people's reactions. And one thing, he was trying to get under Boogie's nerves. He was trying to make sure that she was a little aggravated. He was, basically, he turned to me, he always did this. He would say, but the blind man couldn't see. And we've all heard that one. And one day, he just turns to me out of nowhere, and he says, but the blind man couldn't see. And he had this look on his face, and I will never forget it. My Zadie used to take us to the far park. He would take us everywhere around the neighborhood. He would drive us places. He would show up for every event, every function. And we had a lot of traits in a lot of ways. He also did the one sock thing. If anyone knows about me, I always have one sock on, one sock off. Unfortunately, I don't have as much of a beautiful speech to say as everyone else. Everyone gave such a beautiful speech. I didn't prepare very much, but my Zadie did mean a lot to me, and I will always be thinking of him for the rest of my life. Thank you very much.
Well, now I know who Sam was. And as I was listening to all the beautiful words of tribute, as a rabbi and a Torah Jew, I'm always thinking in Torah terms. I heard about his love for his wife, his 70 years of marriage, and I thought about the fact that his Hebrew name, Shmaya, is identified with one verse in the entirety of our canon, of the Jewish Bible. And the verse is, Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shlomo. This verse, which heralds or opens the Song of Songs, a book that Rabbi Akiva said is considered the holiest of all the books of the Bible, a metaphor for the relationship between us and Almighty God. And of all relationships that God could have chosen to depict and convey the profundity, the meaning, and the magnificence of that special relationship, he chose the relationship between husband and wife. It's telling that the pasuk that embodies his name speaks to the kind of person he was as a husband and as a family man with 70 years of marriage. I heard about a man who went out of his way to teach, but a person who didn't teach so much by what he said, rather a person who taught by virtue of what he did. And I thought about the fact that in this week's Torah portion, we find the commandment to tell our children, to tell them about our experiences and the Exodus. And the Torah, when it speaks about the commandment for parents to tell children or educate the next generation, only in this week's portion gives it in the following fashion. On that day, on the Seder night, and as you guys told me, there was a Seder, you shall tell your child, this is what God did for me. In other words, personalizing the message, teaching not by virtue of words or ideas, but modeling behavior. But perhaps, most of all, this is what you all made me think of. The end of Parshas Bo has an unspoken story. It's only alluded to in the beginning of next week's Torah portion, but it is the climax of the Exodus. The climax of the Exodus is a nation preparing to leave in great haste. There's lots of wealth that's been obtained, and then there's dough that they have to make sure doesn't turn into bread. Everybody's busy. One man is busy with something else. The man's name is Moshe Rabbeinu, our eternal teacher. While everybody was busy with their own wealth and their own needs, Moshe Rabbeinu was busy with the retrieval of the coffin of Yosef to make sure that he would have the proper burial he would ask for. How amazing. Your father passes and is being laid to rest on the very week where the Torah speaks to us about the importance of a Jewish burial and returning the bones to the ground from which they have come, and speaks about our connection to the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu, after the people leave the land of Egypt, addresses them. They had finally camped at a place called Sukkot. They were no longer in a rush. Moshe Rabbeinu felt now was the time to deliver some of the communication that God had tasked him with. And so, before conveying a series of mitzvot, Moshe Rabbeinu said, and I quote, Zachor et hayom hazeh asher yitzatem miMitzrayim. Remember this day on which you went out of the land of Egypt. This was Beit Avadim, a house of slavery, for Almighty God has taken you out with a mighty hand. And then, in the next verse, Moshe Rabbeinu seems to reiterate and repeat himself. Hayom atem yotzim b'chodesh ha'aviv. Today, he said, this day that you're going out is the beginning of spring. What a strange way to speak to people who know exactly which day it is and they know what the weather is. They know that it's spring. They know that the sun is shining, the matzah just baked on their backs. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu have to say, Hayom, today you are going out, b'chodesh ha'aviv? Nachmanides tells us this is because whilst we have a lunar calendar, as is articulated in this week's Torah portion, and is actually the first mitzvah we receive as a nation, we also have a seasonal calendar. And Pesach, or Passover, must always come in the spring. The Sefarno says that's exactly why he says Hayom. Remember, you're left in the spring, you observe Pesach in the spring. But Rashi says something different. He says Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to convey how kind God was to us. Not only was he taking us out of Egypt, not only was he birthing us as a nation, but he did it when the weather was perfect. Today, when you're outside, you'll think of weather that's not so perfect. And you'll appreciate the fact that we left Mitzrayim when the weather was perfect. But this is what I want to finish with. The Rebbe once suggested that therein lies a very powerful message about who we are as individuals and as a nation. You see, today when we'll walk outside and be frozen, we'll look at trees that seem dead. The ground seems to be a place that is frozen and will never again come to life. But we're Canadian Jews. We know that in a few months, the snow will melt, the grass will become green, and the trees will blossom again. This then becomes the metaphor for sometimes Jewish people looking atrophied or frozen. Sometimes it seems that they don't have much in common with their ancestors and previous generations. Sometimes it seems that the neshama has gone to sleep, never to wake again. And then, strangely, this idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, which is not only a generational thing or observed annually, but as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, it's a B'chol Yom V'Yom thing. It's a daily thing. It's a dynamic thing. It defines our life in our relationship with God. Each and every day we try to transcend limitations. And it seems that people are not observant and may be disconnected, and yet, in the strangest of ways, they continue to bloom and to blossom. I saw that in the beautiful words that I heard. I see that in the children and grandchildren that Shmaya ben Eliyahu our Kohen merited to see, and it bodes for a future of continued Yiddishkeit, of continued devotion to higher causes, and Be'ezrat Hashem, to a world that will someday no longer be cold and indifferent, but instead warm and welcoming. This is the world we hope, yearn, and continue to pray for, the coming of Mashiach, a time in which we will all be reunited again. B'mheira u'biyameinu. Amen.